we remember, or we think about, we take into consideration that one of the names of Elohim is Makom, which means the place. The root of Refidim, Refidah, which means to support, and the root of Refidah is Rafad. Rafad, which means to comfort. To comfort. So we find our rest in Him, maybe. We could take that as an idea. We find our rest in Him.
Refidah, is that's the root?
Refidah is the root of Refidim, is Refidah, which means to support. And the root of Refidah is Rafad, which means to comfort. So we find our rest in Makom, in the place. We find our rest within Him. And He does what? He supports us. He stabilizes us. He brings us comfort. Now, what's the catch? The catch is that it says they went to Rephidim where there is no water. There is no water. Anybody remember the story out of Exodus? But when they came to Rephidim, it says Elohim spoke to Moses and he told him, go to Horeb. There is a rock at Horeb. He told him which rock. He says, strike this rock in my name. And he struck the rock one time and water came out. And the people drank. And he called this place, Moses called this place Masa, which means temptation. And he called it Meripah, which means contention. Okay? So, came to a place where there was no water. When you have finished shaping the clay before you fire it, you've gotten all the air bubbles out, you've made your vessel, you cannot fire it while it's wet. You have to lay it out and let all the moisture come out of it. It's an idea in pottery. When all the moisture is out of it, then you take it, you stick it in the kiln, and you fire it. And then it's a pot or a vessel that can be used. Masa, we said, means what? Temptation. It also means to test, to prove. Meripah, or we said means contention, also means to plead. We have to understand that He shapes us, He forms us, but then He sets us aside. Because everything that watered us before has to come out. Everything that we hold in, the old water has to come out. And then we're going to be fired and turned into a new vessel, as we'll see in a minute, that is going to be filled with something. Okay? So, just some ideas that we can get from this. We find our rest in Him. And while we're resting in Him, we're being prepared for something. Now, we can move from Rephidim, and it says, and they journeyed from Rephidim and pitched in the wilderness of Sinai. Now, we said the word Hanan, which means to encamp, comes from a root Hanal, which means to be shown mercy, to be shown favor. What is the first thing that comes? Well, let's go back a little bit. We say wilderness. We get the root dabar. That the declaration, the command, the promise, our ability to speak and converse, and our ability to be taught. Keeping those things in mind, what happened at Sinai? when they came to the mountain of Sinai, we're fixing to think about this when we come to Rosh Hashanah, that the cloud of Elohim descended and he spoke to the children of Israel. And for the first time he said, I am Yehovah your Elohim, you shall not have any Elohim before me. He says, this is who I am. And he gives them the first of the 10 commandments. So we get at Sinai that what happened there was that we were given the Torah. We were given his instruction. So, considering all this, anybody, what would we get from these 4 verses? What could we construct? Don't be shy.
God's guidance and protection as we're walking through the wilderness.
Okay. And what else? God's guidance and protection as we walk through the wilderness.
Wisdom, knowledge, discernment.
Okay.
He's preparing us.
He's preparing us. Okay. We can say that if we're clay, we're being formed.
And I don't think we're much good to him, or much use to him, unless we are reformed.
Right.
He's building us up.
He's building us up. That's good. Okay.
He teaches us with grace, but yet with pressure.
He teaches us with grace and with pressure. Okay. Come on.
Breaks us down and purifies.
Huh?
Breaks us down and
He
purifies.
breaks us down and purifies us. Good. Okay. So we have an idea that so far in the journey, we've gone from depending on ourselves and what I can do to realizing that I have to depend on something greater than me. I have to depend on, well, the most powerful entity in existence in the earth. And that entity has a name that we call our Elohim. We call him Eloheinu, our Elohim. It's personal. And that Eloheinu has a name, who is Yehovah, who means who was, who is, and who is to come. He is eternal, and he is there all the time. His work is continuous. So, we have an idea. Now, let's take these, and well, if I can get them in the middle, we'll pass some down that way and some down this way, and don't miss Naomi over there. So we'll get this, and we'll kind of,
You say something?
Here's our God here, huh?
How many?
we'll kind of look through this together. But do you see, does everybody understand maybe the thought process that goes into looking at a scripture? Okay? We can't look at it topically. What do all of these words mean? Even and.
And has a meaning.
Yeah, and. I mean, yeah, what we consider and in Hebrew. What is and reminding us here?
Connection.
You know, that it was because the Aleph and the Tav became flesh that all of this is possible. That's what reattaches the heavens to the earth. But, so, when we study, we take everything into consideration. I had y'all bring your booklets because we can go deeper than this by just looking at the Hebrew letters themselves, looking at the Proto-Hebrew and getting a more intimate, more detailed idea of what's going on. But based on just the definitions that we have, we can go something like this in verse 12. We say, journeyed, we found a means to move forward. We consider that the wilderness of sin, we consider that in more detail. We consider midbar, wilderness, to mean an area of land that's not been developed, but the root of wilderness being dabar, which means to converse, to declare, command, to promise. Dabar also means to teach. Sin, we had 2 ideas there. It means thorn, but it also means clay. We said that We pitched, it means to encamp, but we also saw that it means to be shown grace, to be shown favor, to be considered. Dovka, we considered that means knocking, but more specifically it means to press with intensity. And we got the understanding that this builds us up in how it affects our relationship. Then we considered alush from verse 13, that means to need. And we took all those things and we put them together, and we got a pretty clear idea ourselves among us as to what's going on. But let's see if this makes sense. I move forward, leaving an area in my life where I have not yet been fully developed. I have received a declaration and a promise from my Elohim that He will not leave me or forsake me. I understand that in the journey forward, my Elohim is with me, holding my hand in the midst of my problems, surrounding me with His nourishment and protection.
Middle of the second page.
Second page.
Middle.
My Elohim gives me rest and washes away my worries as well as my transgressions. When I turn away from them, I know that I am able to speak to my Elohim and that He hears me. He takes consideration of me. He teaches me along the way. I am like clay that is being formed into a vessel for His use. I know that my Elohim considers me and shows me both mercy and favor. I know that in His mercy and favor, He is shaping me, pressing with intensity, and kneading me so that I can be pliable and worked, being transformed by the master potter. Somebody got that right away. From simply being clay to becoming a vessel to be filled by Him. We can take that away from the first two verses. And we saw how we put that together. We got these ideas that we can translate into what the voice is telling us. Now, verse 14, they journeyed from Alush and pitched in Rephidim where there was no water for the people to drink. Now, we have several ideas from what we've studied so far as how we're being transformed in our journey to build our relationship with Yahuwah, our Elohim, or Eloheinu, okay? We are being fed and protected by Him, washed clean by His word, and shaped into a vessel for His use. Now we make our way and we are pitched in Rephidim. This word means a resting place. One of the names of Yahuwah is Makom, which means the place. And in this very stop, knowing what is transforming in our lives, we find rest in the place. We find rest, our rest directly in Yahuwah. The root of Rephidim, as we learned earlier, is Refidah, meaning to support. And the root of this is Rafad, meaning literally to comfort. We get an idea that we can consider that we find a resting place that brings us support and comfort in Yahuwah our Elohim. We find this directly in His Word by His anointing, who is Yeshua HaMashiach. And that we find rest in His heart. The Aramaic, in fact, I'll just read it to you. The Aramaic of 1128, that we find rest in His heart. We find our rest within our Elohim. But Matthew 11:28 from the Aramaic says, "Come to me, all those laboring and being burdened, and you will find rest. Bear my yoke upon you and learn from me that I am tranquil and I am meek, and in my heart you will find tranquility for your souls. For my yoke is pleasant, my burden is light." In my heart. In my heart. Some of you that have been through this a few times know that the last letter, let me make a space here, the last letter of Torah in the word Yisrael is the Lamed. The first letter in Torah is the Beit that spells that. This means heart. That within His Word, within His Torah, we find our rest. And if we look at the Torah, if we open the Torah in the Hebrew, the very center letter, the letter in the very middle of the Torah, is the Vav. The Vav is a representation of you and I, that we are at the center of his heart. Okay? So we find our rest in Yeshua. We find our rest in Torah, the living Torah. So, now we have to address the balance of the verse that tells us where there was no water for the people to drink. So we bring into remembrance what happened at Rephidim in Shemot 17:1-6. Now I'm not going to read it. Here's a paraphrase. There was no water, and the people doubted and complained. Yahuwah tells Moses to strike a rock, and we talked about this, that he is chosen at Horeb, and that water will come so the people may drink. The story tells us that Moses gave this place two names, one being Massah, that means temptation, the other Meribah, that means contention. We said Massah, the root of that is to test, to prove, and Meribah means to plead. So if we bring some perspective to all of it, Horeb means desert, from a root that means dry or parched. Massah means to test, prove. Meribah means to plead. Moses struck the rock in the name of Yahuwah, and water came from the rock in order to quench the thirst of those whose faith was being tested by the lack of water, and thus proving that he is the source of the water, and that we can plead our case and water will flow. So we compare this to John 19:28. Yeshua has been crucified. He says what? I thirst. Why does he thirst? Because the water was coming out of him. He was being parched and dried. Why was Yeshua being parched and dried? So that the water would come to us. It wasn't just a matter that he died for us. He let himself be drained totally bone dry so that we could partake of the living water. What else do we read? We say Yeshua has been crucified. He says, I thirst. In verse 30, he says with his dying breath, it is finished. Because he had completed what he had to do for us. And we move on to verse 34 of John 19 that says that one of the Roman soldiers pierced his side and out came blood and water. The rock has been struck and the blood has been poured out for many. The living water that comes from his heart to all who thirst. We are tested and proved by our faith, and we plead the blood that was shed so that we might be filled with the living water. So we see that we have been shaped into vessels and that we are tested and proved in order to now receive the living water that is the word of salvation of Yahuwah, who is Yeshua. And now we're ready to move forward again. And the last verse that we're going to look at tonight says, and they journeyed from Rephidim and pitched in the wilderness of Sinai. It was here at Sinai that the Torah was given. The wilderness of Sinai is the geographical area between Israel, or between Egypt and Israel. We have been led by the hand of our Elohim through our trials and tribulations. We have found rest in him. He has washed us, shaped us, and formed us into a vessel for his use. We have been tested and proved, being filled with the living water, and are now ready to receive his instruction at Sinai. This is an interesting thing to think about, that when we say we have to have the Torah to understand Brit Hadashah, we have to have Yeshua in order to understand the Torah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a two-way street. We have to be able to believe and receive in order to receive the very Torah, the very instruction. Torah means instruction from our Elohim. So, ready to receive this instruction at Sinai. We no longer reside in Ramses, where we see ourselves as God, providing our own light. We have left Egypt, our bondage, and have come to a point in our lives where we receive the word and salvation of Yahuwah at Sinai.